Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians, a casual sports podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Cunningham.
We're two brothers from the Chicagoland area who love exploring every corner of the sports world. Each week, we break down sports stories, ideas, and theories in a way that's simple and fun.
Whether you're a lifelong fan or just curious about the game, there's something here for everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians. I am your host, Connor Cunningham, joined as always by my co-host, Patrick Cunningham. Hello, everybody. We have a fantastic episode planned for you guys today. On this episode, we're going to be talking 2025 NFL Draft with draft expert, Bears expert, offensive line guru, Quinten Krzysko of OnTapSport. You might know him as Buttkiss Stats on Twitter. Always putting out great content over there. But I am looking forward to learning a little bit more about the 2025 draft class. It's always a really fun time for us Bears fans to get a little bit of a glimpse into the future. I think Bears fans have gotten used to being off-season champions. That's kind of how we operate. In-season champions has been harder to come by for the Bears, but the offseason's always fun to deal with. Always a fun experience. Pat, how's that sound to you?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think the offseason, like you said, is always the best season for the Bears. We might have been 5-12 this season and have missed the playoffs for the last however many seasons, but we always ball out in the offseason. Chicago fan base, some of the most passionate offseason fans, can make you see past all of the flaws in your team and be distracted by the shiny new punter you drafted or the new offensive coordinator that you signed who's apparently going to fix your whole team, only to get to the middle of the season and realize you've got bigger problems. But in the moment, it's fun to be delusional and excited. But no, I'm excited.
Our offseason is our postseason. That's the way I see it.
100%.
Chicago
Yeah.
Bears. Offseason is equals postseason. All right. Before we do that, let's get into a little bit of Chicago news. We'll start off with the Chicago Bears. And the first couple pieces of news we have is a little bit more serious, a little bit more sad. First piece of news, we have longtime owner of the Chicago Bears, Virginia McCaskey, has passed away at the age of 102. She was the longest-standing owner in all of professional sports. The NFL had a moment of silence during the Super Bowl. It's very sad to see such an iconic figure in the world of football and in the city of Chicago pass away. So, rest in peace, Virginia McCaskey. This does open up questions about what is to come with the team. We have talked about it a little bit on previous episodes, but jury's still out on what will happen. But it is very sad to see something that's been talked about for a long time actually happen. And I feel like you didn't think it was going to happen, and now it's staring you right in the face. And
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for the last 20 years or something, Bears fans have been have been hoping maybe for change in ownership, let's say, however that comes, right? But then once it actually happens, it's so sad. This lady was 102 years old, the longest owner in NFL history. When you see how close, literally the next in line after George Halas, who created the Bears, it's pretty crazy to see how close she was to the start of everything. And yeah, you feel like you think of when your grandma dies. I think a little bit about what the McCaskeys are going through. Obviously, they've been preparing for this for however many years. And do I really care what the McCaskeys are doing as owners of a $6 billion team? I don't know. But it's still very sad. And yeah, you always talk about it happening, but you never think it's actually going to happen. I thought Virginia was going to live until she was 200 years old.
that she was eternal. Yeah.
It has been nice to see the respect that the league has shown, and I think the class that a lot of Chicago Bears fans have shown when she died. A lot of very respectful posts on Twitter. Very, very nice stories from Bears players and from fans. Everyone kept it very respectful. Now, I am Also excited to see what is going to happen in the fallout of her death with the ownership structure.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to follow this offseason. I doubt anything crazy is going to happen this offseason with the Bears being moved, but maybe we'll get a little clarity on what the plan for the future is. But moving on, we do have another piece of sad news. I'm sorry, this is we're being Bears bad news right now, but former Bears head coach Dick Duran has died. At the age of 74, he was the coach for 5 seasons for the Chicago Bears from 1999 to 2003. 2001, he won the NFL Coach of the Year after a 13-3 season with the Bears. Chicagolandians fans might remember that fact from listening to the Bear Quiz on a recent episode with John and Michael Cunningham. But another death in the Chicago Bears family. Sad to see. Dick Duran, rest in peace. But moving on to some more lighthearted news, we have a breaking report out of Hallis Hall about Shane Waldron. So Shane Waldron, a guy that you thought weren't going to need to hear anything more about since his firing from the Chicago Bears, but that is not the case. So per Taylor Dahl, he was the host of Making Monsters podcast, so a guy who's a little tapped in on the Chicago front, recently had a report that Shane Waldron would not watch film with Caleb Williams during the season. It got so bad that Caleb had to build his own film room and hire outside professionals to digest film with him because Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, would not do that. And now Shane Waldron was fired, but was recently hired again to be a passing game coordinator. So he currently is employed by NFL
He's still
teams.
dangerous. He's still out
The final note that we have, he's still out there. Yeah. I mean, he is not in prison. The note we have here in the show doc is Shane Waldron should burn in hell, which I think is fair, or I think at least deserves a conversation, the way that he tried to suicide bomb Caleb Williams and the rest of this franchise. Trevor Lawrence, Jaguars, if you guys are listening right now, be careful of Shane Waldron.
It's pretty surprising. I wonder it's surprising how much has come out so far after we got rid of Waldron. All of these stories are coming out. I wonder if it's because Caleb didn't really want to rock the boat as a rookie. He didn't want to be too controversial as someone that is already controversial enough to a lot of people around the league. He didn't want to make matters worse. But yeah, it's crazy to see every few weeks. I feel like a new story comes out with Waldron, not scripting plays, not watching film, just having no respect from Keenan Allen, like all of this stuff. It's like, and how you hear none of it in the offseason or even during the season before he got fired. Like, we kind of all just had our own interpretations from watching sideline clips of him and Caleb interact with each other. It seemed like there was bad stuff, but now that he's gone, all of the dirt is coming out. I just want to hit on Williams built his own film room. Now, what do you think that means? Do you think he got out the hammer and nails and constructed his 2x4s and put together his film room? Like, is it Waldron's responsibility to go to Caleb's house to watch film with him? Or, like, did he build a film room at Hallis Hall? Or, like, what do you think? That seems a little unnecessary for Williams to, like, passive-aggressively build his own film room. What do you think?
I would say that he probably did build something in his house. And yeah, I feel like he should have to go to Caleb Williams' house to watch film with him. He's the freaking coach. That's a thing that Aaron Glenn talked about, of being willing to go to his players' house to talk to them. Or like, these guys are supposed to be in lockstep with each other. It's like how Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford would get breakfast every day, or these coaches are so lockstep with their players. It's Bill Belichick going to the Halloween party. These guys should be friends and love hanging out with each other. But instead, it's like, yeah, I wouldn't watch film with my high school coach, football film with my high school coach at my house, but we have a different relationship. I feel like it just shows a lack of professionalism from Shane Waldron and a lack of seriousness on his end. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe put up some blackout curtains in one of his spare rooms in his bedroom and put up a projector there. I don't really know. I doubt he was hammering together 2x4s to construct this piece of architecture. But overall, bad luck for the Bears, bad luck for Waldron.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Only adds to the case that Shane Waldron, one of the worst hirings we've ever had.
Yeah, F that guy. All right, last piece of news, which you can hit real quick. There has been some rumors circulating about the possibility of the Bears signing Najee Harris in the offseason with the possible eventual drafting of Ashton Jeanty, and with the Ben Johnson kind of looking at the offensive superpowers that they had in Detroit with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, kind of that thunder and lightning. Some people have been speculating that the Bears are going to heavily pursue Najee Harris, who's going to be a free agent from the Steelers this offseason. For me, this is not moving the radar. Najee Harris is not an exciting player. I think he's a talented running back, has not had a lot of production in the NFL. If it happens, whatever, but I just think this is an interesting rumor to come sliding onto our desk, not off our desk. But Pat, if you don't have anything else, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
I know you're a former owner of Najee Harris.
I am a former owner, and I would say Najee Harris, another one of the most disrespected players in the league. Connor, Najee Harris has played 4 seasons. How many 1,000-yard seasons do you think Najee Harris has had?
4.
4. He's had 4 1,000-yard seasons. Now, how many seasons did he have over 1,000 yards? Did he have over 1,100 yards?
0.
Only 1. His rookie year, he had 1,200 yards. Everything else, he just squeaks over 1,000 yards.
I mean, 1,000 yards at this point isn't even that impressive. That's ranked 14th in the league in rushing yards.
Yeah, it's 60.
We got to move
60 yards a game. It's not crazy.
We got to move the needle on 1,000-yard seasons.
Yeah,
whatever.
100%.
But you're right. He is disrespected, and I am one person disrespecting him. But I don't know. Najee Harris is not the difference between us going to the Super Bowl.
Well, can I just add real quick also with Najee Harris, and are people thinking that if we drafted Jeanty, we would want Jeanty and Najee Harris? Do you think I feel like there are similar types of players where Jeanty is kind of a bruiser, people bounce off him. He's obviously he's freakishly athletic, and Najee Harris doesn't seem to be able to move quite as well as Ashton Jeanty. But Jeanty still seems like that big body, thunder, David Montgomery player versus someone like DeAndre Swift. What do you think?
If I had to guess, it seems like Jeanty would be the speed guy. It looks like he's coming in at like 4.4 on the 40, and I don't know if this is true. This is from high school, but Najee Harris ran a 4.66 in high school, which is pretty fast, but I don't think that he ran the 40. He must have not have ran the 40 in the combine, but I think Jeanty is the guy with the breakaway speed. Najee is not that guy, so maybe I would project Najee to be more of the David Montgomery guy, but I do agree. It's less of a difference than David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Like,
right.
There's more overlap between Jeanty and Najee Harris for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Interesting to follow the running back room for Chicago Bears. We desperately need a revamp in that room. As unimpressive as 1,000 yards might be, DeAndre Swift was under 1,000 yards. So would love to see a change in the running back room. All right, some quick hits for some other news. Illini basketball, we lost to Rutgers 82-73 on the 5th of February. What else is new? But on the 8th of February, the Fighting Illini beat the Minnesota Gophers 95-74 in Minnesota. It's a great win. Right now, the Illini, as we mentioned before, are kind of trudging through the season. It's dark times for the Illini. I don't know if this season is a championship season for us, but maybe, Brad, if you're listening to this, use this as bulletin board material to jolt the team together. But overall, it seems like the Illini are in a rut right now. Can't get continuity, can't get offense. I think our three-point shooting is becoming a problem for the team. We shoot the most three-pointers in the Big Ten. I think we're top 5 in the nation in three-pointers shot, and we're not that great at making three-pointers. So I think that will move in cycles, but right now it's tough to watch Illinois play basketball.
Is it a little surprising that I bring this up anytime we talk about Rutgers? They have Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, supposed to be 2 of the top 3 players taken in the draft, and they're only 12-12 right now. Like, I know basketball, there are more than just 2 players on the court. There's only 5 players on the court, right? And if there's one sport that one player can dominate and make such a huge difference, it's basketball. Like we saw Ja Morant win a couple games in the tournament. I don't understand how you can have 2 of the most talented players in the country and still only be 500. Do you think they're more like trait players, like they're supposed to grow into these fantastic players? Like Dylan Harper dominated us in this game. I think he had like 25 points or something. But yeah, I'm just so confused how they are not able to put something together with the 2 most talented players in the country.
Well, yeah, so Ace Bailey was, this is per 24/7, was the number 2. Dylan Harper was the number 3. But then their next highest player was Lathan Somerville, who is a 3-star recruit. So I think that they just probably spent a ridiculous amount of money on those 2 players and then couldn't fill out the rest of their roster. So I think there's just a huge disparity. I think at the college level, the players aren't as good and aren't able to log as many minutes. Foul trouble is an issue as well, with only 5 fouls instead of 6. So I think that they can't take over as much. And I don't know. I just think maybe the rest of the team isn't as good. Big Ten's hard to play in as well. We know college basketball isn't necessarily the level of basketball where individual players take over as much as in the NBA or in high school. But I don't know. Interesting to look at Rutgers. But man, Illinois is tough to watch right now. Yeah,
I agree.
Quick hits, Super Bowl recap. It was on Sunday. Eagles won the Super Bowl. Go Birds, 40-22. That is, scoreboard does not really reflect the true belt to ass that this game was for the Eagles. It was 34-6 going into the fourth quarter. The Eagles completely dismantled the Kansas City Chiefs. Pat Mahomes looked uncomfortable and unlike himself throughout the entirety of the game. He had 2 really bad interceptions to start the game. He honestly looked like we were watching Justin Fields or Caleb Williams behind the line with the amount of pressure that the Eagles were generating with only 4 people. Really something to watch. And the three-peat is dead. Hopefully now we can get a little less Andy Reid, Fundle-Ruski, Pat Mahomes in our lives. But overall, I think I'm happy with the outcome. I think it was about time that the Chiefs got their ass spanked, and I'm glad to have watched it. Yeah.
Loved it. Obviously, boring game. Sucked that halfway through. At halftime, game was pretty much over, but this is what I had been hoping would happen every single playoff game. This is what I did think would happen in the Bills game. I thought the Bills were absolutely going to stomp on the Chiefs. But then after that game, I thought the Chiefs' defense was so good that it was literally impossible for them to get blown out. But yeah, this game very early on, even the first drive where the Eagles were on defense, and you saw them pretty handily take on the Chiefs' offense, you thought, okay, these guys are in it. And then after the first quarter, when the Chiefs went down by multiple scores, I didn't think they had the firepower to ever claw their way back in that game. That was great. Love to see Saquon. Love to see Jalen Hurts get their rings. Eagles dynasty is something nobody is talking about, but is a real thing going on right now.
Gonna hit on another piece of news real quick. Modest Buzelis of the Chicago Bulls was chosen for the dunk contest in the last 6 games. He's been averaging 15 points per game. He's gonna face off against Stephon Castle, Andre Jackson Jr., and 2-time defending champion Mac McClung of this says Magic here, but I believe he's currently in the G League. Interesting to watch Modest compete. He does have some good bunnies. He can really throw it down. So I'm interested to see him play. I have not watched the dunk contest in a while, but I know Mac McClung was really exciting to watch play. But yeah, Modest, good luck, man.
Yeah, dunk contest, something that should be super exciting to watch every year, and unfortunately has deteriorated into something unrecognizable. Hopefully Modest can throw down some good dunks. I've been seeing some highlights. Last 6 games, Modest has been averaging 15 points per game. It's pretty good and been throwing down some nasty jams. So maybe he'll be able to show off some creativity in the dunk contest.
I guess we'll see. But moving on, we have the favorite section of the week, and that is the review of the week. This review comes in from the Chicago area. This is coming from Dick Buttkiss Mustache, 5-star reviews, titled, "Why Are You Not Listening to the Chicagolandians Yet?" with 2 question marks. It's actually a good question. The review reads, "Chicagolandians has quickly become my go-to podcast for all things Chicago sports. Pat and Connor bring an infectious energy and razor-sharp insights to every episode that keeps me hooked from start to finish. Their thoughtful breakdowns of the Bears' latest plays and in-depth analysis of Chicago's dynamic sports landscape are delivered with a perfect mix of humor and passion that makes every conversation feel like a chat with old friends." What a sentence. Maybe could use a couple commas in there. "Every episode leaves me feeling more connected to the game and more excited for what's coming next, making Chicagolandians an indispensable listen for any sports fan. My only complaint is that the older brothers don't guest host more. These guys are hilarious." A fantastic review from Dick Buttkiss Mustache. Rest in power at Dick Buttkiss. Pat, what'd you think there?
It was great. It's funny that the 2 notable Bears legends that have been so kind to write in their reviews have both mentioned the older brother guests hosts, and it just seems like those 2 really kind of speak to maybe an older audience, or they really strike a chord with Bears legends. I don't know, something interesting there. But yeah, thank you so much, Dick Buttkiss Mustache, for writing in from the Beyond the Grave. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, with that, we can move into the meat and potatoes of this episode. We have an interview with this very special guest, kind of coinciding with that latest review. We have Buttkiss Stats, Quinten Krzysko of OnTapSport. We're going to talk some NFL draft news. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right, welcome back to the Chicagolandians. I am your host, Connor Cunningham, joined as always by my co-host, Patrick Cunningham.
Hello.
Today, we are joined by a reoccurring guest, friend of the pod. You know him as Buttkiss Stats on Twitter, Quinten Krzysko. Q, how you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Today, we're hoping to just talk a little bit of draft season. Yesterday was the Super Bowl. We got to watch the Philadelphia Eagles defeat the Chiefs of Kansas City. But that means it's officially off-season time for Chicago Bears fans. We've had about a month to prepare for it already. This is usually the most exciting time of the season for us Chicago Bears fans, but we kind of just want to talk some draft. You know, we have the Senior Bowl has just finished. Combine's around the corner. It's an exciting time for Bears fans. And Q, we know you've done a lot of work, probably more work in scouting than we have done on the draft. So I guess to get started, Q, from my opinion, when we talk about holes on this Bears roster, there's a lot of them, I feel like. But specifically, I would narrow them down to offensive and defensive line, probably, edge, and maybe cornerback. That's my meatball opinion. But in your opinion, where do you see the biggest holes on this Bears roster that Ryan Poles has put together?
I think your first one that you said hit the nail on the head, right?
Yeah.
You have your entire interior offensive line is this gaping hole right now. You don't have players there, right? Like you have some like end of the roster kind of guys there, but Coleman Shelton's a free agent. Matt Pryor's a free agent. Tevin Jenkins is a free agent. Those were your 3 starters last year. You still have Ryan Bates, but how much can you rely on Ryan Bates to do anything after what he showed us last year? Like, you need 3 new starters on that interior offensive line, and that is so much of what we're looking at for draft right now. Is like you got to fill those spots. I think they're going to fill it in free agency as well. So I think you're going to get a blend there. But like that, when you're talking about holes in the Bears roster, that is the number one massive hole that you see and say, this needs to be addressed as soon as possible. Now, beyond that, you mentioned defensive line. I think that defensive tackle depth really needs some at least 1 or 2 more names within it, because I do like who they have starting. You can get a little better, but it could be worse. But that depth is so key to get that rotation in there for defensive tackles, especially because those guys they weigh a lot of pounds. They're playing a lot of snaps. Those are 2 things you kind of don't want going together. You don't want those guys gassed late in the game. You want them fresh late in the game. And last year, they really only had 2 names that they could rely on at defensive tackle. And one of them, Andrew Billings, got injured halfway through the year, and the defense never looked the same after he left. At defensive end, love to get another edge rusher too, right? Like, DeMarcus Walker's awesome. He's fun. Probably best served as a 3rd defensive end, though. Like, if you can get a guy who's either the third defensive end behind him or a guy who is starting over him and Walker can kind of play that kick inside role at times and kick back outside on passing down or on running downs, that's kind of ideal. At corner, I actually think they're in a pretty good spot. A lot of this is gonna depend on Tyreek Stevenson,
Yeah.
but like I feel like you have a lot of talent there, and Stevenson is, he takes heat. He deserves heat for last year,
Mhm.
but he never made sense for that defense. You
Hmm.
look at the player he was coming out of Miami. He's a man coverage corner. He's a guy you want manning up, getting in a guy's face, pressing up on the line of scrimmage. And that's not what the Bears did defensively. It was always kind of a weird pick from that aspect of like the fit is a little odd. So when you look at Dennis Allen's defense, you go, okay, this is what Tyree Stevenson should have been drafted to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
granted, there were attitude issues. It's going to be interesting to see how he takes harder coaching
Hmm.
because he has a personality. He has, we've seen it on the field. He does some boneheaded stuff at times. And Dennis Allen and the staff the Bears have put together, they seem pretty no nonsense, pretty, and they're going to get in your face and let you know if you mess stuff up. Stevenson might get some tough love out of that. And it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how he reacts to that. And another thing that was interesting to me, when the Bears signed Al Harris to be their cornerback coach, one of the first things that came out after that was Tyreek Stevenson would spend his offseason training with one of Al Harris's guys, like
Hmm.
as a positional coach that he is working with specifically. So I kind of wonder if Al Harris is kind of singling out Stevenson as like, we gotta get you up to speed because the rest of this corner room is ready to rock, and
Yeah.
we believe in the talent you have, but you need to be able to execute on it. And when you look at Al Harris and what he was doing in Dallas, those guys were ball hawks. And like
Yeah.
I look at what Deron Bland did there, which granted, these are big numbers to throw out there, but like Deron Bland had like what 8 interceptions and 5 pick sixes 2 years
Hmm.
ago. Like that 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 player archetype feels similar to Stevenson for me, where it's like he's a risk taker, he's a ball hawk, and he can really attack that football. He's gonna get burned at times for it, like just like Deron Bland. That year, Deron Bland made first team All Pro over Jalen Johnson, even though he gave up like 800 yards, which was some bullshit. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's allowed on here,
No, it's okay.
um, but I think that's kind of what you might be getting out of Stevenson here. He's going to give up yards, but he's also going to get a lot of interceptions, or at least that's the hope. That's the vision that I think they have for him. But outside of that, on where they need stuff, they need a running back.
Yeah. Hmm.
I fully expect them to draft a running back in this class, and it's the class to do that.
I will say, if there's anybody who needs tough love, is definitely Tyreek Stevenson, and yeah, hopefully Al Harris with Diggs, Bland, and Jordan Lewis really had some great cornerback play in Dallas. I feel like he could really do a number on this room. I guess just from your opinion, we can't address every need that we have in the draft, especially what we've seen before with trying to address edge rusher through somebody like Austin Booker or line through maybe not premium picks. Where do you want to see the Bears allocate the difference between draft capital versus free agency? Because there's a lot of high profile interior players like Trey Smith we saw on the Chiefs. Didn't have the best performance yesterday, but there's some high profile interior offensive linemen who are going to be coming there. And then also, there's some great defensive players like Abdul Carter in the draft. Where would you want to see draft capital versus free agency money for Ryan Poles?
If you can get Abdul Carter, get Abdul Carter.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that
yeah.
that's an easy one. But I mean, I don't think he'll be there. But
Sure.
to me, interior O line is a spot that you need to attack in free agency. Like
Yeah,
you
okay.
look at some of the names out there with you already mentioned Trey Smith, but like Wilfries, I think is a nice name you could go after. Zach Martin is
Hmm.
there. Kevin Zeitler coming from Ben Johnson's offense in
Yeah.
Detroit could make a lot of sense. Like so I said interior O line, but specifically guard. Because
Hmm.
guard is the spot where it feels like there's a lot of names that make sense, fit, and can jump in here and be making a difference from day one. Now, one thing that kind of I've been stewing on this and thinking it through, and it's like going back to last year, I've been questioning what the leadership of the offensive line room looked like.
Hmm.
And I like Trey Smith. I like his tape a lot. I think he's still developing as a football player though. He's what, 25 or
Yeah.
26, but you watch his tape and you go, okay, this guy is still learning some stuff. He still has room to get better, but that means that he's probably more focused on himself and improving that, and maybe not on his teammates, on the group, on the unit. I really like the idea of a guy like Zach Martin or Kevin Zeitler
Hmm.
because they've been a part of some outstanding offensive lines. They had, and it's not to say they're not going to work on themselves because they have to in their mid 30s by now. Like
Hmm.
they need a lot of maintenance, but at the same time, they understand how the room's supposed to function, what accountability looks like for them and their teammates, and can set that standard high. I don't think there's a standard setter in the Bears offensive line room right now of what a professional offensive lineman looks like.
Yeah.
The closest thing is probably Braxton Jones, right? And as a fifth round, third year player, like it's like, okay, I mean, does he really know?
Yeah.
Can you fault him if he doesn't know for it? Like he's never played with a guy who can really be that standard setter. And I'm not sure a guy like a Coleman Shelton or a Ryan Bates or a Lucas Patrick can really set a standard either when they're, making a third of the amount of money as a Darnell Wright is.
Yeah. No, that's a
So
good point.
I think offensive guard is that position to attack in free agency. Edge, if you want to go get Josh Sweat, I think that
Hmm.
makes sense. I'd love to attack the first round pick with Edge because the more you look at draft history, you sit there and say like, man, these guys don't good edge rushers don't come from anywhere but the first round. It's rare,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Hmm.
can get some serviceable guys, but to
Hmm.
get actual like good starting caliber every down football players at the edge position, those guys they're clear as day when you're going through the draft process, you see the difference between a guy who's a top 50 pick and a guy who's not. And it's
Hmm.
just like these guys almost always go in the first round. So to me, that is a position where it's like you can go get a Khalil Mack. I'd love to see that
Wow.
reunion. But
Yeah.
like he's 34. What's the longevity of that? What's the injury risk of that? Um, Josh Sweat, I think I mentioned a second ago, but I think Josh Sweat could make some sense there as a free agent, or maybe like a Chase Young coming from the Saints.
Oof.
I don't love the idea of a Chase Young personally, but like we know Dennis Allen thinks he's a fit for his scheme, so that makes sense. Or a Dio Odeingbo out of
Hmm.
Indy probably fits the scheme of like Dennis Allen likes big, hefty edges, kind of like Matt Eberflus did. He likes guys who can really set the edge, fill a run lane, a guy who can keep the linebackers clean is essentially what that comes down to. So there are some names at edge that they might attack in free agency. Personally, I'd like to see him go get a guy who can get a bucket. Like
Hmm.
when I when I'm watching like playoff football, and that because that's what we hope the Bears are next year, right? A playoff football team. You got to have a guy who in the fourth quarter you just say, "We need you to go get a sack."
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you're finding that guy in free agency, right? You're finding
Hmm.
that guy at number 10 overall.
That makes sense. Now, sorry, Pat, I'll let you jump in here in a second, but I noticed you mentioned Josh Sweat, maybe Chase Young. I noticed you didn't mention another player that is kind of on the block right now. 270 pounds, former All Pro. You haven't mentioned Myles Garrett yet. Do you think that's in the cards for the Bears, or with Ryan Poles getting a new extension, you think that's something you'd like to see, or no?
I don't think it's in the cards.
Yeah.
Um, I think I think it would be malpractice for them not to call Cleveland and just find out what it takes,
Hmm.
But my assumption would be what it takes is not on the table for the Bears right now, like
Yeah.
multiple first round picks or something like that. I mean, usually my stance on that when you have a chance to get an edge rusher like that, even if they're 29, like Khalil Mack has still been awesome for the Chargers. Like you need to sniff around, you need to find out what that price is. But for where the Bears are right now in their building process, for like I'm just not sure Myles Garrett is gonna get you that. Like you're saying, we want to win a Super Bowl this year if you go trade for Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
Maybe that's their attitude. Maybe they can, but I wonder how much it could just potentially set everything back. And maybe that's past trauma talking. You know,
Yeah.
maybe that's Mitch Trubisky trauma talking from 2018 of trading for Khalil Mack and then not having first round picks thereafter and
Sure.
everything that came from that. But I mean, if they, I guess I would ask you guys if
Yeah.
the Bears traded the Khalil Mack package, so that's two firsts two firsts and more like a third for
Yeah.
Myles Garrett and a second and a future second. How would you feel? Like, what would your instant reaction be?
If it was two firsts, is that including? So that's our current first and then next year's first.
Yeah, let's do it that way. Let's assume it's before the draft.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would probably Bears fan inside of me would be excited. The responsible fan would probably be nervous because I know that edge rusher is not what caused our offense to score be in the bottom half of the league this year.
Yeah, 100%. That would make me super nervous. I feel like that's like this year where the whole time you're screaming, you need offensive line, you have these offensive line problems, and then Keenan Allen comes into the picture, and you're like, okay, actually, we're okay. We're all right because we have Keenan Allen now, where it's the same idea, where you still have all of these problems, and then you bring in a shiny new toy and think it's going to fix everything. And then we get in the middle of the season, and Caleb Williams is still getting sacked 65 times. I think especially with Caleb
blocking.
Yeah, no, 100%. Especially with a guy so young right now, we need, I think, as much draft capital as we can to build something around Caleb, and that's just betting the house on winning right now. Would not like that.
Yeah, and here's the one thing that always gets me with this argument. It's like I feel like I never have a response when someone's like, "Well, yeah, those picks could be anything. They could even be Myles Garrett." Like it's like,
Could be a boat.
You're
Yeah.
right. Like I can't argue against that. Like you're not going to find Myles Garrett with those draft picks, but like just the general value of giving up those picks and giving new money on a massive contract when your defense already makes a lot more money than your offense does.
Yeah.
It just feels like the value's out of whack to me.
I agree. I think, Meatball fan was like, you just want to, you're building a Madden Ultimate team. You just want to grab all the shiny players, but it's probably not the best. Now, Pat, last question I have. You didn't mention offensive tackle with Braxton Jones there. Do you feel like that's more of a luxury pick? I know a lot of talk has been about the Bears possibly trying to upgrade at tackle with a guy like, Kelvin Banks, maybe from Texas. Do you feel like that's not something that we need to be addressing or just not as pertinent of a need for the Chicago Bears?
So I think if you want an offensive tackle, if you want to say we are replacing Braxton Jones this year now, you need to do it in free agency because this tackle class they're all guards. Like there are not many tackles. Like if you want to go take Josh Simmons out of Ohio State, it's like okay, I can see like that is a tackle. Or the kid out of Oregon, like I'm not as high on him as Simmons, but that is a tackle. But just about everyone, like I watch Kelvin Banks tape, I see a guard, so it's like you might take one of those guys and say, let's get him in the building. Let's figure out what his body composition looks like. See if maybe he can drop some mass and gain some explosiveness. And then in year 2, then we have that option to move him to tackle. But for most of these guys in the draft, year 1, I don't think they're tackles. I think they're guards. I think they're walking in the NFL as guards, and they need to like a guy like Kelvin Banks. I think if he cut some weight, add a little explosiveness, he could probably play some tackle. But I'm not counting on him to walk in the NFL and become a tackle right away.
Yeah, that's fair. Especially with year 2 of Caleb, to risk your left tackle as a rookie player who might not even profile, athletically or physically as a tackle. That's a risky move for Ryan Poles to make, and I wouldn't expect him to make it either. Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, my mindset with it kind of is I'd like to see them target a guard with some potential tackle flexibility. And then that gives you the option of in a year, if Braxton plays great, you go, okay, great. We maybe we pay Braxton. If Braxton continues to have injury issues or like struggling with certain things that you don't think are gonna improve, then you can say, well, we got Karan Amagaji, he might work, or we've got what's his name? Donovan Jackson,
Mm,
who is a guard, but he also played some tackle in college and looked really good at tackle, and he has the requisite length to play tackle. So you get that positional versatility between the
sure.
two positions to say, okay, we've created options for ourselves. And notice the hesitancy around Amagaji, and man, I'll tell you that like he didn't play great, but he showed some real traits to be excited about last year.
Okay.
I'm not saying he's gonna develop, but to say he won't seems premature to me because he does have some really nice traits that make
Okay.
you like his anchor is better than Braxton's. He's got that serious 36-inch long arms. Like
Hmm.
that is a tool. Not a lot of guys have that in the league. That is an extremely long arm length, and he has athleticism to boot. There is a lot of reason for me to think there is potential for him to become good. Now,
Hmm.
I don't know what that percentage. That might be a 1 in 4 shot or something, but I do still think they see Karan Amagaji as a legitimate option for not this year, but the year after, probably.
Hmm. Well, that's a rave review for Amagaji that I would not. Yeah, I don't know. I guess watching that Commanders game, I was like, man, get this guy out of the field.
Right. Well, I mean, hey, it's a 21-year-old kid who
That
just
makes a lot of sense.
just made
It's
a
true.
giant jump from Ivy League to NFL. Like
Yeah.
True.
he was put in a position that he shouldn't have been put in.
True.
He was not ready to play NFL football.
Yeah.
And to your point, he might never be, but
Hmm.
he has those traits that you want to bet on at offensive tackle. He has just about like I think Dane Brugler had him as like a top 50 or 75 player in
Yeah.
his draft board, and it's entirely traits based. Like
Hmm.
guys with those traits typically don't get out of the second round.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the injury that he had was probably the reason why he did, because it
Yeah.
was a pretty serious injury from what I've read about it. But I thought he showed plenty of the athleticism that made you say, okay, I get why they took him.
Yeah. Makes sense. That makes sense. Gotcha. Q, when you take a high level overview of this upcoming draft class, what do you see like kind of stands out as the big strengths or maybe some of the big weaknesses? Obviously, last year we had crazy value with the offense, like incredibly deep quarterback class and wide receiver class, both of which I think are lacking in this draft class. I think it seems more like a defensive heavy first round. What do you see as kind of the strengths and weaknesses here?
Running back and tight end,
Hmm.
extremely strong running back and tight end class. I mean, there are 3 or 4 tight ends who I'd be really excited about in this class. I mean, I think 3 of them are going in the top 50 this year. But
Hmm.
and tight end, like I don't, I'm talking to a Bears audience, so it's like, well, we've got Cole Kmet, but like I do think the Bears need a backup tight end, and
Hmm.
it could if there is a world where a guy like Colston Loveland or Harold
Hmm.
Fannin is there at 41,
Mhm.
I'd strongly consider it. I don't, and obviously that partially depends on what you do at 10 and 39 before that. But like
Sure.
those guys they seem like special prospects to me. And it's just really hard to pass on guys who you have that kind of label on. Now, they might not be there. I think one of them probably will be. So it'll be interesting to see how that board shakes out. But at running back, there's just a plethora of talent in this class, which is it's also got that dude, right? It's also
Hmm.
got Ashton Jeanty, and it's
Mhm.
like, man, it's such a strong class. How can you take a running back at 10 with that strong of a running back class? And then you watch Jeanty's tape, and you're like,
Whew.
it's hard to argue against. Like, so that's going to be an interesting aspect this year, especially when we see how the board shakes out towards 10.
Sure.
But um, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. Outside of that, strong defensive tackle class. There's a
Okay.
good amount of defensive tackles in here from the first to like day one through day two. I think through the top 100, there's going to be a lot of defensive tackles to consider. And no one else has been saying this. I think it's a really strong offensive guard class,
Mm.
Hmm.
and I think that's because it's a weak offensive tackle class.
Hmm.
There's a lot of offensive tackles I've watched who play like offensive guards. And what I mean by that is they're power players. They're not finesse
Mm.
players. And they're probably getting knocked as offensive tackles because their feet are a little slow and um, they're not great at protecting their outside edge and pass protection. And those are all things that I don't worry about as much as at guard. I see a guy like Tyler Booker. I see his
Hmm.
tape coming out of Alabama. He's an offensive guard through and through, like he's playing offensive guard in college.
Hmm.
And I go, well, this dude's feet are slow as sin. What's the difference between him and like Kelvin Banks? Like Kelvin
Sure.
Banks' feet are way faster, and he's
Hmm.
got he's got similar power. Now, that's not to knock Booker because Booker brings some real nasty hands to the plate. That's like that gets really interesting that a Kelvin Banks might not be as developed with, but
Hmm.
I really it feels like almost every tackle I've watched, it's like this dude could be a really good offensive guard in the league.
Gotcha. Are there problems that come up when you take a tackle and move them into the guard position? Is that like a big learning curve, you think? Someone like, I mean, Jenkins, obviously we drafted him as a tackle and now he's playing guard. What is that transition like?
I think it depends on the player. I really do. Like I think Tev had an easy time because Tev plays a game that's based on power.
Hmm.
He is a glass eater. He wants to put you in the dirt. He's mean, he's angry, he's strong, and he's just bigger than you. And
Hmm.
that is the type of player who kicks inside really easily, right?
Hmm.
The type of player who relies on mirroring the edge rusher at tackle
Hmm.
and using his length to win. That's not sometimes that is the guy who struggles when they move into offensive tackle or offensive guard. And like we can look at Pierce Karonsky out of Notre Dame 2 years ago, and he's
Hmm.
gonna be the
Sure.
poster child this year for this discussion. But he played a finesse game, right? He was a
Hmm.
really good offensive tackle in college,
Hmm.
but that arm length was a real issue for him moving into the NFL, and he had to kick inside. And when you watch his tape, it was very much about body positioning, very
Hmm.
much about the timing of his feet and quick feet and being able to beat the rusher to the spots and being able
Hmm.
to continue to funnel them upfield. And that's not how you play offensive guard. At
Hmm.
offensive guard, you don't have that space between you and the rusher. It is the ball is out and you got to be punching people in the mouth and moving people.
Hmm.
So it's just a very different game inside that not every offensive tackle is suited for.
Hmm.
A lot of guys are, but a lot of guys also aren't. Like if I wanted to take like Josh Connerly Jr., I would never move Josh Connerly Jr. to guard. I would be very skeptical of that. And that's not a knock on him. It's he's an athletic offensive tackle who has a lot of the offensive tackle traits you want, but his game is not a power game.
Gotcha.
And the interior
Sure.
is always about power.
Gotcha. Is there something too with like from the traits perspective? You talked about the finesse, being faster. Is there something too about taking a huge guy and trying to fit them into a much tighter spot at the guard position? Like taking someone that's, I think Will Campbell is 6'6". Do you see it? Is there a problem with moving a big guy like that inside? Or is it just if you're big, it doesn't matter?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think most offensive guards in the league. I'll actually pull it up as I'm talking because I think I can find on mock draftable the average size of a offensive guard. But most guys are 6'5", 6'6" at offensive
Yeah.
guard. Like it's not necessarily a smaller position. But play height can come into play. Like
Mm-hmm.
so,
Hmm.
I guess the average NFL offensive guard is about 6'4". So he
Okay.
is a little tall, but with Will Campbell, one thing that is a little concerning is play height. He just plays
Mm.
very tall.
Gotcha.
By nature, he has learned to play the position at a higher posture level than a lot of other players, and that's where he's comfortable. That's how he does. And when you're playing tall, it just makes it easier for a defensive tackle because you're not going up against an edge now. You're going up against a tackle who's coming into really quick contact off the snap, the very upward motion, right?
Yeah.
So you lose that leverage. Like you just don't never win the leverage if you're too upright. That's where height can factor in, and where you need a compensating factor. Like Matt Pryor's a great example of this. Matt
Mm-hmm.
Pryor was awesome in pass protection last year.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, couldn't run block very well, but pass protection was very impressive because he's just so damn powerful in his anchor. You can't really move him. he was able to take the leverage equation out of it a lot of times because he's just so damn big and strong. That's like,
Hmm.
okay, he just figures it out. And I'm not sure I see that same thing with Will Campbell, which is where I get a little worried about moving him inside because I see him, he has nastiness to him. And when I say
Hmm.
more of a finesse player, it doesn't mean they're not nasty. It
Yeah.
means they don't, power is not their dominant trait. And I
Hmm.
don't see Will Campbell's dominant having power being his top, three traits. But I do think I'm in a weird spot with Will Campbell because
Sure.
if his arms come in over 33 inches, he's probably not even there at 10 for the Bears. I don't
Mm.
think.
Yeah.
I think he'll go early and be the best tackle in this class. But if they're under that, probably like 33 and a half inches, I should say. If they're under that 33 and a half inches, I end in a really weird spot because I think he will be there, but I'm not sure he's the best guard in this class. And then I love the football character I see with him.
Yeah.
And I keep going back and forth on this where I'm like, this guy is gonna has that type of football character, that those type of leadership traits. He's gonna be good at whatever he needs to do in the NFL, whether that's guard or tackle. He's just gonna figure out a way to make it work. He seems like he has that kind of off-field mentality, that kind of leadership traits. Like it's just the guy is an offensive lineman through, and he'll find a way to make it work. But then another part of me is like, but he plays so tall, and if it's like, I don't
Sure.
know his play style inside. So I end up with
Hmm.
a weird area with Will Campbell.
That
Gotcha.
makes sense. It's interesting with moving the tackles inside. I think you saw with the Eagles a feature that the Fox had was just how big that offensive line was, and you'd see it on the broadcast. And even with like Mekhi Becton, who was drafted as a tackle out of Louisville, he's 6'7". You see that offensive line, like size really does help sometimes. But yeah, I mean, you do see success stories. Yeah,
Becton's similar to Pryor in that aspect. Like, just how do you move this guy? Like, he's
yeah,
just so heavy and so big and strong and powerful.
sure. I thought it was interesting that you brought up Skoronski, just because I feel like at that draft class he was labeled as maybe just like the best lineman, period, maybe depending on where he would translate. And I feel like you've seen this topic before with like when Quentin Nelson was drafted, or like somebody drafted as a guard. Maybe you don't want to spend that high draft pick. But just overall, if you look at this draft class, who do you feel like is the best pure offensive lineman? Like guy, regardless of position, is just the best offensive lineman in the draft.
I mean, it's probably Will Campbell.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot to like in his tape, and I hope he can stick at offensive tackle though. Josh Simmons is my top offensive tackle in the class,
Hmm.
but part of that is just that I believe he is staying at offensive tackle. I have no issues with that, and there is risk with him though. He only played like I want to say 6 games this year before tearing his ACL, and so he's coming off a torn ACL, and he didn't prove it a lot prior to this year, but he didn't face the toughest competition this year either. So there's some questions there with him. Behind that, I mean, there's not a ton of top end talent, if I'm being
Yeah.
honest, on the offensive line. I like a lot of like I have a ton of second round grades on guys. They're going to go in the first round because it's a weak draft overall at the top, and
Hmm.
when it's weak, teams are just going to lean into the trenches and say we're just going to attack trenches.
Sure.
But I mean, a guy like Gray Zabel, I really like as far as like if you were to throw him at center, I think there's a lot to like there. Um, or even offensive guard, really. I just think his tape was really impressive. And beyond that, other guys I've mentioned, like I think Kelvin Banks Jr. is going to be just a monster of an offensive guard in this league.
Yeah. Do you think just overall this is a you think from an offensive line perspective there's not a lot of top end talent, or you think just in general this is a weaker draft class?
In general, I mean,
Yeah.
right now we've only got with building the board, we've got 76 players watched and only 9 first round grades.
That's crazy.
But in that same vein, we have 26 second round grades so far. And we have very
Hmm.
few receivers or corners or safeties within there so far. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of names to still be added. But
Hmm.
like that's those not that so that second round grade number I think is going to grow up towards like 50 guys with a second round grade, but
Hmm.
probably topping out around 20 guys with a first round grade.
Yeah. Okay. And now, before we move on to the specifics at the 10, just from like an edge rusher perspective, I know there's Abdul Carter for sure. I know James Pierce was a great prospect last year. I feel like his season this year wasn't as good. And then there's the guy out of, I believe, Texas, Stewart from Texas A&M. I think he's a good player too. What do you see from the edge class in 2025?
So Abdul Carter, I think, is the best player in this class.
Sure.
I think he is prospect number one on a lot of teams' boards, and he is just different and a special edge rusher. That
Hmm.
being said, I love James Pierce.
Yeah.
I love James Pierce's tape. I didn't even watch any of last year's tape in the 3 games I've watched of him so far. I
Hmm.
I love what I saw from him this year. I don't
Okay.
understand why he fell off draft boards. I feel similarly to how I felt last year about Jared Verse.
Hmm.
Jared Verse got knocked down boards for some reason last year after being essentially considered the number one prospect the year before for like the upcut for the next year's draft. And it's
Yeah.
like, I feel similarly about James Pierce. I think he's being unfairly knocked right now. I'm not even sure he will be there at 10, but if
Yeah.
he is, I have a really hard time saying the Bears should pass on James Pierce because
Sure.
that I mentioned earlier, a guy who can just get you a bucket. I
Yeah.
think that is what James Pierce is. Like I think he is a guy who can bring some special twitched up physical ability to your defense, and he's a dog, man. Like
Yeah.
he will bring the fight to you. He doesn't care that you're bigger than him, stronger than him. He goes 100 miles an hour at all times. I think James Pierce is going to be a special pass rusher in the NFL, and I think there's not much reason for the Bears to pass on him if he's there at 10. Beyond that, I haven't gotten much to Shamar Stewart or Nick
Hmm.
Scourton yet. From what I have seen, I wasn't overly impressed. They're very traitsy players
Sure.
without much production at the college
Hmm.
level. So you're talking about much more developmental prospects, I think, as they enter the league, guys who might need a year or two to really stew and figure stuff out. But James Pierce is the guy who I've seen that I'm like, that dude can walk in day one and be a difference making pass rusher outside of Abdul Carter.
Yeah. It's exciting, man. And yeah, I feel like the NFL is always a game of traits, especially at like some of those lengthy positions like tackle and defensive end, where production will just totally be, or for a large part, just be ignored. And you look at just pure, what can you project onto that player? What can you see them becoming? I think sometimes that's an interesting debate to get into.
Yeah. And then one other guy
Yeah.
I should mention, Mike Green, or I guess two more guys, or at least two, probably three more I should mention at edge,
No, go
if
ahead.
not a few more. But Mike Green out of Marshall,
Okay.
people are falling in love with him. I don't think he fits what Dennis Allen wants. Short
Okay.
arms and lighter. Like Pierce is lighter, but he has long arms
Mhm.
and he plays like he has length. Mike Green doesn't really fit that profile. He's a really fun watch, really impressive football player, but he has some issues with that length and with his play style that I don't think will endear him to Dennis Allen. And I believe, yeah, you'll have to fact check me on this. I believe he has some off-field issues that are
Mm.
probably going to push him down the Bears board, if not other teams' boards.
Okay.
Um, Now, Princely Umanlian, I love this dude out of Ole Miss. Like he was at Florida last year, Ole Miss this
Mm.
year. I loved his Florida tape. I still love his Ole Miss tape. He's not very good against the run, but he has a really long, long, wiry frame, and he just pulls out some of the wildest pass rush moves I've seen from an edge rusher in college. Like everything is on the board for him. He is willing to try anything, and he goes 100 miles an hour at all times. I'm a big fan of Princely.
Okay.
He's been projected around the second round, early second round. I wouldn't be shocked if he went in the first. And probably not around 10, but like in the teens to the 20s. I wouldn't be surprised at all if his name got called.
Okay.
Then Landon Jackson's another name out of Arkansas. Really freaky frame. Like he's like 6'6", 270 or something like that. And just a really
Holy cow.
impressive athlete at the same time too.
Mm.
But he's kind of awkward at times.
Hmm.
Like it never feels like he fully strings everything together, but his physical traits are so impressive that he's probably going in the second round. I think probably early second round. He's an interesting one who would definitely fit Dennis Allen's defense. I'm just not sure. I need to watch more tape on him. I just don't, he's kind of awkward. And last year I watched some of his tape and said, if this guy goes back for another year and pieces this together better, he's going to be a first round pick. But I don't know if he actually pieced everything together very well this year, as much as just kind of replicated what he did the year before. So that'll be interesting to watch. And then JT
Mm.
Tiumulau out of Ohio State.
Yeah.
This guy is going to fit Dennis Allen's defense. He's not sexy. He's not fun. He's not the springy, fiery athlete who's going to remind you of Von Miller at times. He's just a solid football player who brings a lot of savvy to the table. Has some nice pass rush moves, but is going to be able to set the edge against the run. Probably going like mid to late second round, I would think. But he's more of a floor player, high floor, and something that's always stood out to me. Because last year when I watched his tape, I haven't watched a ton for him this year, but I I didn't like it that much.
Okay.
But then I watched the Penn State game and I watched him punk Olu Fashanu over and
Hmm.
over with a pass rush plan that continued to build on itself throughout the game. And then in the fourth quarter, when Ohio State needed plays, he was doing it against
Olu.
Olu Fashanu.
Yeah.
I was like, I was about to say Penny Sewell. I was like, what am I saying?
Yeah.
Penny Sewell against Olu Fashanu. He he punked him again and
Yeah.
ended the game. And it was just like that was eye opening to me of like this dude understands how he needs to win and is able to actually take that from the film room to the practice field to game day and execute on it. And that is something that I know scouts will care about.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then moving on to actual meat and potatoes here. We're talking about the 10. What do you think? What do you expect Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles to do at the 10? What do you want to have happen there? And what do you not want to have happen?
So I won't be upset if it's Will Campbell. I'll talk
Okay.
myself into it,
Sure.
but that's not what I want. I want the Bears to find James Pierce there. Hopefully that's my number one option right now. That is if you can get
Interesting.
James
Okay.
Pierce at 10, that is the way to go because like I said earlier, you don't find these guys outside the first round. You
Yeah.
often don't find these guys outside the top 15 picks, maybe
Yeah.
even top 10. Like if you want a premier edge rusher in the NFL, they're typically going top 10. And
Mhm.
this might be your last chance to get that. So like to me, James Pierce is top target at number 10. But beyond that, man, I'll tell you, it starts to get tough
Yeah.
because Mason Graham is I don't think Mason Graham's going to be there. I don't think Abdul
Okay.
Carter's going to be there. And then you're talking about, well, do we want Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan? Do we need it? Take cornerback top 10? Like, does that make sense? Do we want to reach on a guy like Kelvin Banks Jr., who I don't think is a top 10 talent in this class. I think he's closer to second round talent than a top 10. Um,
Okay.
or do you want to go after a tight end to be the backup tight end? Because Tyler Warren will be there at 10.
Hmm.
That's good value, but like
Mhm.
it doesn't make a lot of sense. This draft gets a like that 7 and later range is tough territory where it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And that's where it gets so interesting with Ashton Jeanty. Because
Yeah.
I'm sitting there doing a mock and I'm like, my options are Will Campbell, Ashton Jeanty, and James Pierce usually isn't there right
Hmm.
now. Maybe he will be there, maybe Josh Simmons. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I just take Jeanty over and over. It's like, or I want to trade back. But
Mhm.
if number 9 looks similar to number 10, you're gonna have a hard time trading back because they might trade back from number 9, like or trade
Yeah.
back from number 8. Like everyone in that range is gonna be looking to trade back, which makes it a lot tougher to actually execute on and get any real value out of it. Like if you can trade back from number 10 to number 15, but all you're getting in return is a third round pick.
Yeah.
How do you really feel about it? Like the value needs to be there. Otherwise, you're passing on potentially elite players to just get an extra third round pick. Like that doesn't sit well with me either. So like I don't know. I get the whole analytics argument, never take a running back that high and all that. I love Ashton Jeanty's tape. I love what I see from him. I know it's a strong running back class. If you're sitting there screaming, take Omari and Hampton in the second round instead of Ashton Jeanty at 10, I don't really think that's an option. I think Omari and Hampton's going first round as well.
Okay.
And then the Ohio State running backs, you can make a strong case for them. You can make a case for Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. All those guys in probably the second round. If you can get them in the third, I'd be surprised. But there's so many backs in this class that you sit there going, well, yeah, good back in the fourth round. I'm sure you can in this class. But is that back going to be different? Because Ashton Jeanty's different. Like this dude, and sure, he averaged a little under 4 yards a carry against Penn State in the bowl game. He also carried the ball like 30 times on an offense that couldn't throw the football, like against a Big Ten powerhouse team. Like he made some really impressive plays in that game. I still grade him pretty well for that game. Ashton Jeanty, I think, is going to walk in the league and be one of the best running backs in the NFL. And it's hard for me to pass on that, even with the positional value argument, especially when you talk about Ben Johnson's offense and how many different run concepts he wants to focus on and how much variety he wants in there. I think you need an instinctive back who really feels those run lanes, and that's something Ashton Jeanty has in spades.
How would you compare him to past big-time running backs coming out of the draft with like Bijan, or even thinking about like Gibbs or Saquon Barkley? Like, where would you put Jeanty in that category?
Below Barkley. Below
Sure.
Barkley, absolutely. Barkley was just different.
Yeah.
Now, with Gibbs and Bijan, I wasn't as high on Bijan as everyone else, probably to a fault. Like I knew he was going to be good. I just didn't know that he would be different good. And he's worked out in the NFL. But
Yeah.
I like Jeanty better than Bijan. Some of that's probably stylistic. Some of that's probably level of competition. I fell in love with Jeanty's tape the second I watched it because he's plowing over dudes and had breakaway speed against big time opponents. Like, and that combo is huge to me. I am a meatball in some ways, and one of the ways I'm a meatball is I love a good truck stick, and that's something Ashton Jeanty gave you a lot of that Bijan probably didn't give you as much of. Or same with Gibbs. I loved Gibbs. I thought Gibbs was going to be a game changer in this league. I wasn't confident he would be an every down back though. And that's where I think Ashton Jeanty can be an every down back. So it's probably, if I'm being just my opinion, it's like Saquon is one, then I put Jeanty, then you get Bijan, then Gibbs. If I'm being more realistic, it's probably more like Saquon, Bijan and Jeanty are tied, or Bijan is slightly ahead of Jeanty, and then you get Gibbs. As far as prospects go, because I think Gibbs has probably surpassed Bijan as far as like their production levels in the NFL a little bit. Because I know Bijan put up a lot of yards and touchdowns, but I don't know. Gibbs is just, that dude's a playmaker among playmakers. But I think Bijan and Jeanty are really close as prospects.
Yeah.
For different reasons. They're different players. But because Bijan gave you more pass catching, more pass blocking ability than I think Jeanty has as a prospect. But I think Jeanty gives you more toughness as a runner and a little bit more natural flow to his game and how he kind of makes people miss and it sets up defenders to not get clean tackles on him.
I feel like when you look at Jeanty play, it doesn't even make sense looking at some of the statistics that he has, like deep running back class. A guy like Cam Scatabo, really fun to watch in the playoffs. And you look at his stats, he was whatever in the Heisman rankings. He had 1,700 rushing yards. Jeanty had 900 more rushing yards than that guy. Like, the pure production is just unreal. And yeah, I agree. There's always the debate of the analytics of taking a guy like that where, the running back might not work out well. But, I mean, if you look at some of the top offenses in this league, this year they were running back led, I feel like, with the Ravens or the Eagles even. They were just, allocating serious resources to the running back position worked out for them. Or even with the Packers, Josh Jacobs ended up being the primary face of that offense. I feel like sometimes it can just be a very important pick. And when you can get exceptional play at the running back position, I feel like it can make a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a trend to those first two teams you mentioned as well. Probably the two heaviest offensive lines in the NFL running some gap concepts straight at you and just saying we're going to blow the doors off you.
Yeah. No. So last question I'd say is, if you had to put $100 on it, what do you think will happen? You want Pierce there. Do you think Campbell is going to be the pick, or what do you think how do you think that'll shape out? I know it's early, but what would you think?
If I had to put $100 on it and you gave me the caveat of I know the player's going to be there, it's Pierce. I think Pierce is going to be the pick if he's there. But
Okay.
if there's no caveat like that, I think GT is the Bears pick at 10.
Really?
I think that's where yeah, because the more I look at it, I'm just like, it makes too much sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that,
And I just don't know that Pierce will be there. If I think there's a 40% chance Pierce will be there, I'm putting the money on GT because I think that's over a 50% chance he's the pick.
Yeah. Would you want Poles to be active in trying to move up in the draft?
No, I would avoid that at all costs.
Sure.
I mean, sure, maybe you'd move up for a Mason Graham or an Abdul Carter. But outside of that, I mean, I don't think you should move up for a Jeanty or a Pierce. I'd be more okay with it for Pierce than Jeanty, but ultimately, I think you're sticking at 10 or moving back.
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, it is early. I think you had retweeted a mock draft from, I believe, 2023 that somebody had posted with Jahmyr Gibbs and Jahmyr Gibbs going to the third round or some just unreal value. February is very early to project with these players, so I know a lot's going to change from now until April when the actual draft comes. But I think that's going to do it for this episode. Q, really want to thank you for coming on. Every time that we have you on, always impressed with how much knowledge just how much ball knowledge you have, man. So really
just
appreciate
how much of a nerd I am.
Yeah. But yeah, if you have anything else you want to plug, Q, this is your chance if you want to shout anything out.
Yeah, just make sure you're checking us out over at Building the Board. All our podcast episodes are under the Bears on Tap podcast channel. Also, check out my work over at Shaving Points Podcast, where we give out, in season, we give out weekly picks, and we'll do a little bit of draft coverage over there as well. And our real kind of focus over there in the off season is after the draft in May, we'll start doing team by team breakdowns of all 32 teams and putting those out on YouTube and in podcast form. So if you're a Bears fan, if you're anyone else fan, we'll be covering your team with our opinions on the full off season, full roster, coaching decisions, everything that has impacted and changed for that team. So make sure to check it out.
Nice, man. Yeah, I will definitely check it out for sure. Well, yeah, I think that's all we have left. So as always, I'll end the episode with Bear Down.
Bear down. Bear down.
Yeah, thanks guys. Bear down.
All right, and we are back from our interview with Quinten Krzysko of OnTapSport. Had a fun time talking to him a little bit about NFL draft, about Bears needs. Kind of makes you think about what's going to happen at that number 10 overall pick. Maybe it's going to be Ashton Jeanty. Who knows? Pat, what were your thoughts?
My main takeaway is the ascension of Ashton Jeanty as a possible pick at number 10. I remember a couple weeks ago with Mike and John throwing out the idea of Ben Johnson wanting to take Jeanty and all of us not really being a fan of it. But then when you hear Q talk about it, someone that actually knows ball a little bit and does his own research and has a little bit of a...
Do your own research.
Yeah, a little bit of a more educated opinion, you think, oh, that kind of makes sense. I could see how we do that. As long as we address our interior line through free agency. Would I rather have a sweet defensive end? And do I think that's probably a better use of that pick? Yes. But do I think it'd be more fun to watch Genty play with Caleb Williams? Yes. That would be much more fun. So yeah, I'm sure, and I think come draft day, I can't imagine how much more people are going to be calling for Genty over the next couple months, especially when we see him in the combine, what that's going to do to his stock. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest point was just the idea at 10, would you rather take a okay prospect at tackle who might need to shift into guard, an okay guard, or a okay defensive edge if Pierce or Abdul Carter aren't there? Or would you rather take, while maybe not the most positional value, an exceptional standout player at that position? I feel like regardless of positions, you want to be adding blue chip players whenever you can, and Genty is the definition of a blue chip player. So I think it's exciting to at least think about, and this is something that our roommate Sam said, which I fully agree on. If we're going to hire Ben Johnson and be excited about Ben Johnson, if he really wants to draft Genty, then he should be able to. That's what needs to happen. We can't hire him and then say, well, you can't do what you want to do. And you know what? The word generational gets thrown out too much, but it would be fun to pair what people would call a generational quarterback with a generational running back, with a generational head coach in Ben Johnson, generational punter in Torrey Taylor. That'd be a generational team. Maybe we'll get 6 wins next year. Who knows? But, Pat, did you have any other takeaways from that interview?
No, nothing else. I think that your point about the specifically highlighting the weak tackle class this is right now, I would say a couple weeks ago, and still I think all I really want us to do with all of our picks is draft linemen. But it's when you listen to some more educated opinions about the draft and you see the value that you can get at the number 10 in other positions, and that you are kind of overreaching for, like you said, a subpar player that's not really worth that 10th overall pick by drafting a tackle. You know, it gives you a new perspective, and I think it's a better idea to use that pick at with a better prospect than trying to fit somebody like Will Campbell into our tackle position, even if he's not going to be ready for it, or if he's just not built to be a tackle.
Yeah, I totally agree. Q, thank you again for coming out of the podcast, but I don't think I have anything to add. So with that being said, I think we're going to wrap it up. If you guys enjoyed this episode, enjoyed our interview, please share with a friend. We say this every episode, but if you enjoyed the podcast, I'm sure, I can guarantee you can think of at least 2 other people who would also enjoy this podcast. Please leave us a review if you want to be featured on the best segment of the week, the review of the week. Follow us on social medias at Chicagolandians, wherever you may find us. We are producing exceptional short-form content. And email at us at the Chicagolandians email for business inquiries. But with that being said, I will end the episode as we always do with a bear down.
Bear down, baby.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Chicagolandians. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you want more Chicagolandians content, you can find us everywhere at Chicagolandians.